great to have you here, Greg. And I would say as time is short, let's dive right in.
Yeah. So the first question is, Greg, who are you right now? And what's your mission?
I am probably the last person to know who I am right now because I'm too busy fulfilling all of my promises. I'll tell you, I'm the same person now that I was in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. I love this world. I love the people of this world. I feel certain that we as a species have left information for ourselves in the past that we knew could help us in times like the present, in times like today, if we understand where to look and how to look. And this is one of the reasons that I am so passionate about ancient traditions, ancient cultures, the texts that they have left behind, the indigenous wisdom, because our ancestors understood their relationship to their bodies and to the earth and to the cosmos very clearly, very clearly, excuse me. It was not science as we know it today, but the understandings were valid. And so my sense, ever since I was very young, I felt that I could possibly contribute in some way to helping us to become better people, and to embrace the changes in the world in a healthy way, not just to survive what happens day to day, but to thrive through new understandings and new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing ourselves and our relationship to the world. And I think that I personally do not think of it as a mission. Some people call it that. What I asked myself early in life, I said, if for some reason I died and left this world today, would I feel complete with what I have shared with this world? Would I feel complete with my life? And the answer was no, I wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And then I asked the next question, what would it take to feel, to say yes? What would I have to do in my life to feel complete? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that question is what we're doing right now. It's in every book. It's in every presentation. It's about honoring myself, honoring the people around me, and the wisdom that we're only beginning to understand, this extraordinary potential within each of us that we simply are not told. And if we can awaken that potential, then the problems in life take on a very different meaning. And I cannot think of a better way to devote my life energy and my time in this world than to helping us all awaken to that potential and what it means in our lives, because it helps us to become the best versions of ourselves and create the best world possible. And that is our love. I believe that we are worth the work. I'm worth the work. Our world, it's worth the time and energy that it takes to bring this new information forward. So that's a long answer to a short question.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
We're
totally on the same page. So,
and so you already started to talk about it a little bit. You said, and also in your series Missing Links, you're talking about that we're going to a lot of changes right now, that like the world is changing. Sure. So maybe briefly, what does that mean exactly?
You know, it's interesting to me because there was a time that many people did not recognize the changes in the world. They didn't acknowledge them. They said, you know, what are you talking about? The world is just like it's always been. And then things began to change. The changes that people see sometimes most often are the ones that affect them the greatest. So the economy is one of those, and certainly climate and weather is one of those. So many people, even today, they view the extremes of the world today as a temporary anomaly. Mm-hmm. And they say, if we can just hold on until things get back to normal. They're waiting for things to go back to normal. And so I asked them, what is normal? And they said, well, you know, the way things used to be. So they're waiting for the climate to go back to the way it was 15 years ago, or they're waiting for the economy to go back and the interest rates to go back and, you know, job numbers to go back and all of these things. And the point that I am sharing with them is that we cannot go back to a world that no longer exists. That world is gone. This is the new normal that we're in right now. Now, as a scientist, I'm a degreed geologist, and as a scientist, what's been important for me is to say why is now different? What makes today so different? And there are many factors, but what I've seen is there are 3 key cycles that you have to look at big expanses of time to recognize. One of those is a climate cycle, and we are living a climate cycle very similar to what we lived 5,000 years ago. Humans did not cause the change in the climate. We are contributing, and we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But even if humans were not here, Earth would be going through the warming and the cooling cycles. And we have the evidence. We have the evidence of that. So that's one cycle. The second cycle is the economic cycle. And a lot of people don't realize that there are what are called seasons. There's a spring and a summer and a fall and a winter in economic cycles. The economists know this very well, but you don't see it, you know, on CNN or BBC. They don't talk about this. So we are in an economic cycle. It is a spring cycle where the value of things begins to change, interest rates begin to change. And if you don't know that, if you're still thinking the way you were thinking of money 10, 15 years ago, it can be a very bad experience. And the third cycle surprises a lot of people. I had the opportunity to be with my colleague, Dr. Bruce Lipton. We were invited as a team to speak at the United Nations in New York a couple of years ago about what we're talking about now. What is happening in the world? Why is it different? What can we expect? What are the trends? And I shared with them the third cycle is a cycle of human conflict. And they were very surprised. They said, you know, what do you mean? Doesn't conflict just happen randomly whenever it happens? And the answer is no. If you look at the cycles, if you look at human conflicts, either locally or globally, and by the way, this works for personal relationships as well as nations. What we find is that conflict is directly related to solar cycles, which sounds kind of woo-woo and airy-fairy until we begin to link up, connect the dots in the science. The strongest magnetic field in the human body is the human heart. It's not the brain. The heart is about 5,000 times stronger than the brain magnetically. Well, that's important because we live on a magnetic planet. Earth has magnetic fields that literally couple to the heart. And our magnetic fields are strongly influenced. Now, I'm not going to say they are directed, but I will say they are strongly influenced by what is happening in our sun, solar cycles. So the 11-year solar cycles that we see, the magnetic fields ebb and they flow, and they directly, there's a sequence, they directly affect the Earth, and the Earth directly affects us. And now social scientists are actually looking at solar cycles in terms of what is called social coherence, social chaos, social coherence. So the reason I'm saying that is if you look at the cycles of the past, when the great wars have begun, World War I, World War II, when they ended, they're always at the top or the bottom of these cycles. This is important because this year, 2020, we are at the peak of a cycle when the magnetic fields are very low. So here's the relationship. When the magnetic fields are low, we typically are more aggressive. We are less willing to cooperate. So we are vulnerable in the year 2020, but I want to say, be very clear, that those cycles, we're not slaves to the cycles. And because of what the cycles mean, when we understand those cycles, then we open the door to clear communication. If we say, okay, we're in this cycle, it's important for us to be a very good listener Listen to our partner at home when they're expressing their concerns. Listen to our coworker, listen to our boss, or if you're in the United Nations, listen to what the leaders are saying about their nations. Listen clearly, have very clear communication, choose our words very precisely. And here's the beautiful thing that I want to share, because although we are at the greatest point of vulnerability, we are at the greatest possibility of peace. We have the greatest possibility of peace that we have had in any time in this cycle if we capitalize on what this cycle means. All right, so there are three cycles. There's climate, there's the economy, there's conflict. Any one of them by themselves would be enough to change the way we live our lives. All three are converging.
Wow.
And this is a primary driver for creating human change. When the climate changes, it changes the way that we live our lives, what kind of jobs we have, where we live, where we grow our food. The economy is influenced by that. And if we don't agree on what that means, this is where the conflict comes in. So it's a perfect storm of converging cycles that push us to the very limits of what we believe about ourselves, and the unsustainable thinking and believing must collapse. And that opens the door for new and sustainable ways of thinking and living on the planet. How we share vital resources like food and water and energy and medicine. And you don't need me to tell you that. All we have to do is look and see. But here's the thing. If you don't know where we are in these cycles, it just looks like the world is falling apart.
Okay.
My mom, when she was still able to communicate, she's in late stage dementia now. So she doesn't know me. She can't communicate with me. But when she could, we would have these conversations. And she would just say, to her, she said, man, the world is just going to hell. It's just falling apart for no apparent reason. When you see the reason, what you see is it is intense, but it's brief. These cycles, these convergences, they don't last, forever. They're brief, they're intense, and it's the choices that we make at these turning points, at these choice points that now set the stage for the world that we're about to enter into, the world for our children. I have no children of my own, but all the children in the world are my children. So all of the world's children, this next generation, they are depending on us to make the choices that will set into motion sustainable ways for a planet of 8 billion people to share all the things we need. This is where the thinking is doing this. And you're seeing this in politics. This is where politics, policy, science, and spirituality all come together in a really beautiful way. Because what we see right now is there's a thinking that we have to bring down the successful people and bring down the successful nations so that everything is more equal, rather than trying to elevate everyone through a new way of thinking to a higher standard of living based upon sustainable principles. And it is very possible to do that. It's just a different way of thinking. So
and that's the problem we actually see in our small town in Bern in Switzerland. There's lots of people that are scared, and they just focus on the negativity, and they just are disoriented. And so we were thinking about possibilities, how we can support more love and more positivity in our environment in a small town like in Bern. So do you have any idea?
Absolutely. I'm right there with you, because everything that we're experiencing is all a product of the way we've been taught to think.
Exactly.
And a lot of this goes back to something I talk about in my books and my programs a lot. Charles Darwin released a book in 1859 called Origin of Species.
Right.
And part of his thinking with regard to evolution for all forms of life, including humans, Charles Darwin believed that the fundamental rule of nature, the law of the world that we live in, is based upon what he called survival of the strongest. And those were his exact words. I have one of his manuscripts with me. Later on, his words were adapted to become survival of the fittest. And a lot of people say that. Yeah. And toward the end of his life, he actually changed his thinking. But most people don't see that. So his original thinking, survival of the strongest, because nature is based upon this model of competition, conflict, scarcity of the things that we need. All right, so 1859, that was a long time ago. So what? You know, what's the big deal? The big deal is that the society that Byrne is living in right now and that America is based upon in the Western world, that society, the foundations of that society were put in place in the late 1800s and early 1900s. True. Darwin was a scientist and his work was accepted quickly. It was accepted almost without question in the mainstream. And so his thinking is embedded into our thinking. His thinking is embedded into the corporate system that's based on survival and competition and conflict, into the economic system of the world based upon scarcity and survival. So this is where the new science is so powerful, because the best science of the late 20th and now the early 21st centuries are telling us that this is a place where Darwin got it wrong. The problem with Charles Darwin's work, and I have a lot of respect for Charles Darwin. He was a geologist, I'm a geologist, you know, and I just want to say Darwin never expected his theories to last forever. Right. He stated openly that they were meant to move us in a scientific direction. And he fully expected that when new discoveries overturned his theory would fall and new theories would be put in place. He's okay with that. Right. It's the modern academics that are not. So what is happening right now is that the cycles that we talked about are pushing the world to the limits of sustainability based upon a model that is not sustainable. It's based upon false assumptions of competition, conflict, and struggle. Right. So if we're going to build a sustainable world, we've got to change the fundamental principle. We've got to change our thinking. And here's how easy that is. When we get up every morning, we have been taught, based on the old ideas, to ask this question: what can I get from the world today? What's in it for me? What can I get if I do this kind of work? What can I get if I help this person? What's in it for me? How do I benefit? That thinking informs the way that we go about life. Right. Now we're being asked to shift from what can I get to what can I offer? What can I contribute? What can I give to the world that's emerging? And that little shift, that little shift changes the way that we go about our day. It changes the way that we think about our lives. It changes the way that we treat other people in the grocery store, in the office, in the school, in the marketplace, on the street. If we truly, at the core of our being, embody every day the thinking, how can I contribute in my life, in my little circle today, to make this a better world and to help somebody else's life have a better day? How can I do that? And that shift is the shift that's being reflected. And now there are new economies that are emerging that are based upon cooperation and not competition. They're not based on ideas of scarcity. And the marketplace doesn't like those because they don't understand them. But those economies, there are new kinds of economies that are emerging. So can I just tell you a quick story to illustrate what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
Go for it.
So I think, I live here in the United States in a rural community in the desert Southwest. The state is called New Mexico. It is a high desert, very dry. We're at 7,000, 8,000 feet above sea level. So what's that? About 2,500 meters above sea level. And a friend of mine was a builder, a licensed contractor building sustainable housing. And it was very, very popular. He was doing well. He had a huge company, had many employees, everything was going well. Yeah. 2008 came along, and 2008 was the economic crisis and the housing crisis. Everybody stopped buying houses. The markets deteriorated. He lost his company. He could not help his employees. He lost his employees. He felt terrible about it. And he lost everything. And one night, when he tells the story, one night, he just bolted out of a deep sleep. He woke up and he said, I've got to change my thinking. He said, what do people need? What do people need? And how can I contribute to that? And he said, well, they always need food. They always need water. And he woke up the next morning and he designed on a piece of paper on his kitchen table, and he designed and built a prototype and implemented a garden. It is a raised bed covered, self-watering, self-heating, self-cooling garden system that can be installed in any yard, and it's modular, so you can install 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, however many you want. It will grow food year-round, and as a construction worker, rather than taking his skills to build a house, it was very expensive that people couldn't afford, he began building these gardens, and his business is now stronger than it was when he was building houses. And he's building these and shipping them all over the world. And he wakes up in the morning and he cannot wait, because he gets to go and meet the people that he's installing. We've got 2 right here in our yard, and these 2 little gardens grow more food than my little family can use. And so we share it at the local homeless food depot. We take them down, fresh greens year round. I mean, in the coldest temperatures in January. And the point is that Ken shifted his thinking. He said, what do people need? And how can my skills? So it's not about where your degree is or your certificate or even your experience. It's what is your passion. Now, as a builder, he put his building skills together. Instead of building a big house, he's building a raised bed garden. So this is how changing the thinking can lead to a very successful economy as well, a local economy. He's thriving in the new world. What can I give to the world rather than what can I get from the world? Rather than saying, what can I get from the world that exists? What can I give to the world that's emerging? And that shift is the answer to your question.
This is so beautiful, really.
It is.
But if you're talking about this, still, like, I feel there's so much resistance, like, especially from like companies or the media, as you're also talking about it in your new book. And so what do you say about that? Like, what are the biggest challenges we're facing?
Well, you know, I do see resistance because it's something new.
Yeah.
And this is where, when the facts are clear, our choices become obvious. And it has not yet been made clear to the general public that we are living a rare window of extremes. We can expect extremes, not bad things, just big extremes in our lives. Extremes in climate, which lead to extremes in weather. Extremes in the economy, we're certainly seeing that right now. Extremes in conflict coming about in ways that we haven't seen in the past. So we're living a time where it makes sense to expect those extremes. But if people don't know that, then it's what we said earlier. They believe that we just get through, you know, the next few months of next year. This is temporary, and everything that we've done in the past, we can continue to do. It's hard for people to say the past worked in the past, but it's not working now. That is a difficult decision to make, but it is a necessary decision as we adapt to a changing world. And we are the generation that is bridging this gap. And you're seeing it playing out in the political world, certainly the political landscape, because the politics are being, they are using science in the politics, but they are skewing the science. It's called cherry picking the scientific data.
Okay.
So the science has been hijacked.
Right.
Science can only serve us if we keep science honest.
Mhm.
So when people are very aware of the fact that this is different, this isn't business as usual, and they see I see this happen in mainstream audiences when I can show them the cycles and the charts, and they
Right.
say, my God, of course we see why this is different. And now you don't have to impose new ways of doing things because people are asking, they're saying it's obvious. What we've done in the past, yeah, maybe it worked 20 years ago. It cannot work in this new model now. Where do we go from here? And that is the opening, but for new ideas. But if people don't understand that, the resistance that you're seeing is that people don't understand, and the media is not helping people to understand that now is different. It's not bad, and it is not the end of anything other than unsustainable ways of thinking and living. And I think part of the problem, and I'm working with groups, I'm working with think tanks globally. Part of the problem is when you talk about something no longer working, if you don't have a clear vision of what's next,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to let go of
Right.
what you have. If you have a clear vision of what's possible, what exists, what are the new forms of energy that don't require the burning of fossil fuels?
Mhm.
When you begin to see that, it's much easier to let go of the burning of fossil fuels. But it's hard just to say no more fossil fuels and have nothing to go to,
Right.
especially when you're having extremes in the weather.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're thinking about new kinds of diseases. The old thinking is that the human body is frail and we need all these chemicals and pharmaceuticals to prop up our resistance. The Indian government right now, in the face of the coronavirus, has publicly come out and said it's not about the pharmaceuticals. They are asking their people to use traditional homeopathic and herbal remedies.
Wow.
And the reason they work is because those remedies, many of them are mushroom based, and there are biological properties in mushrooms that will strengthen the exterior of the cell wall, and a virus is only viable if it can penetrate that cell wall. And so our indigenous ancestors have known there are certain herbs, there are certain, just having a reasonably strong immune system. So
Right.
the Indian government is the first on a global basis who has come out publicly, the leaders, and saying, this is what India is a sixth of the world's population
Wow.
in one country.
Mhm.
And they don't have the medical means to pharmaceutically address every one of those people. So they are asking them to do what people have done for a very long time. So if you're reasonably healthy and you have a reasonably strong immune system, you have a better chance of not succumbing to the virus. So it's about sustainable ways of thinking. And there is a place for pharmaceuticals. I'm not denigrating the pharmaceuticals, but what has not been acknowledged is the wisdom and the intelligence of the human body. Our body is so smart, it is so resilient, and we have such extraordinary potential that is not realized in many circles. It's not being taught in medical schools. For a perfect example, 1991, scientists discovered 40,000 specialized cells in the human heart. There are neurons, but they're not in the brain, they're in the heart. And I say discovered, they've always been there, it's just scientists recognize them. These neurons actually send the signal to the brain to tell the brain what chemistry to release into the body, what kinds of resistance to bacteria, to virus, to environmental factors. And where it gets a little tricky is that we are the programmer that tells the heart what signal to send to the brain. Exactly. through our emotions. When we feel a sense of well-being, when we feel safe,
Yep.
There's a little switch. It's a little switch in the chemistry of our body that begins to flood. It floods our body with rejuvenation, regeneration. And when we feel threatened, when we are scared, when we have anxiety, which is what's happening in the media right now. In the media, we're being told there's something scary out there.
Right.
You got to defend yourself, protect yourself, but they're not really telling you that you have any ability to come to terms with what's happening. So this is another place as the science is made public, because it's already out there. But as the public becomes aware of the of the peer-reviewed science that says we have the ability to self-regulate our own biology. This is such an extraordinary statement.
Yeah.
We are the only form of life that can consciously self-regulate our immune system, our longevity enzymes, our resilience to change in life. We're the only form of life that can do this, and it's based on rock solid science. It's not being taught in the medical schools. When I was in Switzerland, we had cardiac surgeons who were there who said, "Why don't we know about this? Why isn't this being taught in the schools?"
That's the question. Why don't we know about it?
Yeah.
Like, why didn't it happen earlier?
Well, you know, that it goes back. I have friends. Well, I have friends who are only my friends until we have this conversation. And then for about 2 weeks, we're not friends. Because I have friends in academia. They're teaching in the universities. And some of them are teaching medical information. Some are teaching anthropology about the origins of humans. Where do we come from?
Yeah.
Are we the product of a random process, just lucky biology, or is there something that happened in our past that's not random, that cannot be attributed to evolution, something that happened that makes us who we are today? And the evidence supports the latter. The evidence shows that we emerged, we showed up on Earth 200,000 years before present. That's accepted, no controversy there. The thing is, we showed up as what are called anatomically modern humans, and we haven't changed. If we take our DNA today and we compare it to the DNA from anatomically modern humans in the past, we can now extract that DNA from fossilized bone marrow. We can actually, it's like the movie Jurassic Park, except it's not science fiction. So we compare our DNA to their DNA, and for all intents and purposes, you can't tell us apart. We're the same.
Crazy.
Evolution, the evolutionary theory says that nature gives us very special attributes only when they are needed to survive the environment that we find ourselves in. The problem with it, and the way it's Alfred Wallace worked with Darwin to create the theory of evolution. This is Alfred E. Wallace is his name. And the way you hear this, it says nature never over-endows. So nature never over-endows a species with more than they need at the moment that they need it to survive. The problem is we showed up 200,000 years ago over-endowed. We have so much extraordinary potential, way beyond what we need for everyday survival. And that violates that fundamental law. And so my colleagues in the universities, I say, why can't you teach this? Yeah. And what they tell me is their 30 or 40 year career. They say it invalidates that career. Yeah. So the way they're dealing with it, they're saying, we're going to let the next generation of professors deal with this. We're going to teach the old stuff, even though we know it's no longer true.
Oh my God,
this is what we're teaching, and then we're going to retire and let the young professors figure out how to embrace this new information. Same thing is happening in medical schools. You know, my colleague, Dr. Bruce Lipton, wrote the book, The Biology of Belief. In the 1960s, he was doing experiments. He was required by the university to do experiments and then to teach what he was finding. His experiments were not supporting what was in the textbooks. So he was showing that if you take one cell and you expose that cell to one kind of environment, that they're stem cells. So stem cells can become many things. If you expose that stem cell to one kind of environment, it becomes a muscle. You expose that stem cell to something else, it becomes a nerve, or it becomes a fat cell. And he was not allowed to share in the classroom what the experiments were revealing. He was in the foundational years of what we now call epigenetics. Epigenetics says that the environment around us, so our nutritional environment, the water that we drink, the air that we breathe, and our internal environment, our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and beliefs, are the environment that determine what happens with those stem cells. That is a very, very different way of thinking, that we somehow influence the way that the cells in our bodies are expressing. Now it's a whole new science. It's called epigenetics. And it says that lifestyle factors like diet, exercise, nutrition, and things like meditation, things like affirmation, things like prayer, when they're done in a very specific way, actually tell our bodies how our DNA is expressing. The technical term is we can upregulate or downregulate genes based upon creating this environment in our body, thought, feeling, emotion, belief, as well as nutrients, diet, exercise, all those things. That's a very different way of thinking. And it's not being taught, hasn't been taught in medical schools. Bruce left his position as a medical school teacher because they would not allow him to share this, and he took it mainstream very successfully. And this is what my dear colleague, my dear friend, my spiritual brother, Bruce Lipton, this is what he does today. And we often do it together from the stage.
So who's hiding the truth? Like, why is the truth not available for everybody?
You know, I don't know that it is any one entity. It's very difficult to change. There's something called the standard model. The standard model is the standard model of how the universe began, how life began, how human life began. And there is a battle that is playing out to preserve the standard model. And there are a lot of reasons. There are religious reasons for the standard model. There are economic reasons. The pharmaceutical company is very invested in us being victims, powerless, needing something external to help us. And again, there is a place, a pharmaceutical company, the modern pharmaceuticals have done amazing things in the world. And I think there's a place to integrate them in a conscious way, but not to give our power away to them as the only way.
Exactly.
And I mean, we obviously have evidence of this. Polio has pretty much been eradicated in the world, and the role of antibiotics changed the way that we live. But all of these things were used in excess, and now we are in danger of becoming immune to the antibiotics. We're already seeing that happen, and Here's a perfect example. This is where there was something in the year 2000. Our president in the United States was Bill Clinton. And everybody has a smile on their face when they say Bill Clinton. It was a whole different world in the Clinton years. Totally. But he did something that is rarely done by an American president. He came on national television and he announced a scientific discovery to the world. You don't see presidents do that very much. They don't get involved in the science. And he announced the completion of what was called the Human Genome Project. And it was the scientific endeavor to map all of the genes in the human body. And the scientific thinking at that time was there are about 100,000 proteins that make up the human body, approximately. Some say a little bit more. And the thinking was it takes one gene. Each gene is designed specifically to make a specific protein. So they said, okay, 100,000 genes in the body. There must 100,000 proteins in the body. We'll do this map. We'll map 100,000 genes. And every one of those genes, you can patent the gene. You can build a pharmaceutical to target that gene. And now we got 100,000 new drugs. Man, everybody was on board with that. Well, guess what? The announcement and the scientific community was shocked, because when the human genome was mapped, we only have about somewhere between 24 to maybe 25,000 genes. We've got about the same number of genes as a common roundworm that you see in the ground, or a fruit fly. And we said, well, wait a minute, we're more advanced. How can we have the same number of genes as a fruit fly or a worm? And this led, and this is going to tie right into what we're talking about. This led to the discovery that we have the ability, all forms of life have the ability, one gene can be programmed to produce many different proteins. So this is why 25,000 genes can produce 100,000 proteins. We program that gene, and we do it through thought, feeling, emotion, belief, diet, nutrition, exercise. And the science now that evolved from that is called epigenetics. Epi means above. So we're talking about something above the genes that we came into the world with. Bruce talks about this very eloquently. But this is an example of why we are such extraordinarily powerful beings. We're the only form of life that can consciously choose the parameters to change our diet, exercise, the way we breathe, to change our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and beliefs, to change those consciously. And when we do that, we consciously change the genetic expression in our bodies to become either the greatest expression of ourselves or the worst expression, depending on what we think, feel, emote, and believe.
Exactly.
So we are conditioned to feel powerless, helpless, and that conditioning feeds into this old system. So when you ask, why aren't they sharing more of this? There are the religious institutions are fighting to hold on to the standard model. Corporate interest, economic interest, academic interest. The universities want to hang on to that standard model of evolution. The problem is the data no longer supports it. And you can only teach, what we're doing right now is we are teaching obsolete science based upon false assumptions to our young people. And then we're asking those people to solve the problems that we're leaving based upon the obsolete science and the false assumptions that led to the problems. And that can't last very long. So there's a new generation of young, and it is changing. I have met very open-minded physicists and biologists in their 70s and 80s who are very willing to change this. So it is changing slowly.
It's very slow. It's very slow.
Well, I think that the conditions of the world will determine the speed of the change. And as we are faced with conditions of extremes like a global pandemic or like an economic downturn for the whole world going into a recession, for example, or climate change. Climate change is a fact, and geologists have been saying that for a half a century. Climate change is a fact, and because it's a fact, we need to adapt to the climate change. Simple things. For example, in the United States, the Northeast, so the New York, New England area of the United States, densely populated. And they now, every year, it's almost like clockwork, they'll get a big storm, the temperatures drop, the rain turns to ice, the ice clings to the electrical power lines and becomes so heavy that the power lines will break, the poles will break, and for weeks or sometimes over a month, Manhattan can be out of places of Manhattan out of electricity, or they, hospitals have emergency backup. It only lasts so long. If we accepted the fact of climate change and we adapted by burying those power lines under the ground, first of all, we would put a lot of people to work. So we'd have a lot of jobs. Secondly, you would save cutting down the trees that they use to create the wooden poles to put the power lines on. We need the trees. And third, and perhaps most importantly, is now no matter what the weather's doing, everybody's got power, everybody has electricity, everybody has heat. The air traffic control can still work with the planes. Hospitals can still do operations. Families can still come home from work and cook their food, and the weather goes through its changes. It's not as much of a problem because we embraced the truth of the climate change and we adapted. What we're being told, this is where politics come in. Politicians are making people feel guilty about the climate change by telling them it's their lifestyle that caused it. And they're trying to stop the climate change. You cannot stop a planetary cycle that is directly linked. It's linked to Earth's three parameters: the tilt, the angle, and the wobble of Earth with relationship to the sun. Geologists know this, and they don't get the voice and the platform that a mainstream politician gets. So it's a perfect example. If we embrace the deep truth of what's happening and we adapt to that, it's not a problem. It's not a problem anymore.
Wow.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
It's amazing times.
Yeah.
Well, it requires a shift in thinking. And when people ask me about this, many of my followers know a little bit about my personal life. That I was born in and raised in a rural community in the Midwest of the United States, in a very dysfunctional post-World War II family. My father was an alcoholic, very abusive. Left the family when I was young. We lived in government subsidized housing. I lied about my age, went to work at a copper mill. When I was in high school, working 4 p.m. to 4 a.m., 12-hour shifts for union wages. And during that time, my mom, it was a hard time in our family. And my mom gave me a book that influenced my life to this day. And it was a book by a Sufi poet. His name was Khalil Gibran, Gibran. And it was a very, very famous book. To this day, the book is called The Prophet. And in The Prophet, the prophet is speaking to people. They ask him questions, and his answer is maybe a page or 2 pages long, and that's the chapter. And so easy read, but you'll think about this stuff, for days. And when the prophet was asked about work, what he said to his people influenced my life at that time to this moment in my life. He said, work is our love made visible. Work is love made visible. So when I went to work loading boxcars at the railway with 50-pound bags of cat food, or I was working in the copper mill, or I worked in the restaurants, bussing tables or washing dishes, whatever it was, that shift in my thinking, this is my love for my life, my love to support my family who needs income. And it's all how you think. When I began loading the boxcars I worked 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. And there were 50-pound bags. I said, you know what? If I do this right, this can also be my workout for the day. So if I lift with my legs, I work my quads. If I lift with my arms, I lift my chest, and I get paid for a workout. This is me loving myself. It's that shift. So here's why I'm saying this. It's a philosophy, and it's a choice as to how we look at these things. My philosophy is that it takes a lot of work to change the way we think. It takes work for the universities to change, for politicians to change. That work is our love made visible. The question is, do we love ourselves enough to put the energy and the time, the work, into honoring the deep truths of our existence? What the best science of the modern world is now telling us is true. Do we love ourselves enough to take that knowledge and make the shifts for sustainable ways of thinking and living for ourselves, for a better world, and for the young people? Or do we live in fear? We hate the work, we live in the fear, and we cling to the familiar and what is easy, even though it's no longer working. That's the choice. And we're making that choice right now. I don't know the answer. I don't know how we as a species will choose. My sense and I'm very encouraged by what I see all over the world.
Yeah.
My sense is that we love ourselves and we love one another. We may not always like one another, but and I've seen this. One human may not like another human when they see them on the subway or on the bus. But if one human sees another human drowning in a river, they'll risk their life to pull them out. They'll run into a burning house to pull them out. They will run into a burning house to save the life of a dog or a cat, because that's our true nature. And that's what I prefer to look at. I like to see our truest nature, not the mask of the ego and the fear that society has brought out from us. We are good people. Humans largely are good people. We are compassionate people. We want the best for everyone. And we're trying to balance what we feel is best in our hearts with the world that we've created that doesn't support that. And that takes work.
Yeah.
Do we love ourselves enough to put the work into doing it? I believe we do. And I think within our lifetimes, we will see the fruit of that work. We'll see the fruit of that labor.
Totally.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What do you think? Do you agree? Do you think that?
I would love to start to teach kids at school, teach them compassion and love and care and reflection and all those things that are not taught in elementary school.
I love the way you think. I love the way you think.
No,
and so what I'll say, in most schools in Western countries, a teacher can only teach in the classroom in public schools what has been approved by the school board in the curricula. So the qualities of compassion and love, those are not easily embraced by the school board. However, this is the good news. What is embraced is the principle of cooperation versus competition. So think about this. What would it mean to have an entire generation of young people who believe that the world, nature is their friend and the world is their friend, not their enemy that they have to struggle against? I was taught when I was young, I was taught and the phrase is an American phrase, maybe you've heard this, that we live in what's called a dog eat dog world. And it means that I was taught that I have to fight for everything good that will ever come into my life. And I think it's true for all of us. And it can be a very difficult path. Yeah. But this is the other thing with young people. If you send a young person into the world and they do not have a clear identity of who they are, they don't have a rock solid anchor, emotional anchor of who they are, they will get lost. They'll get lost in the world, and their peer reviewed or peer pressure from social media will influence them in very negative ways. So this is what we can do with our young people. We can help them to understand who they are, what their relationship to the world and to nature is, and that nature is based upon this model of cooperation and not competition.
Yeah, so a lot of work ahead of us.
A lot of love made visible.
So, well, I just wanted to say that I used to be a school teacher, elementary school teacher, and I couldn't bear it anymore. I was like a pioneer in the school system and nobody was kind of understanding what I'm talking about. So I quit school because I couldn't watch old school teachers destroying those little kids and their souls and their love. I couldn't watch it anymore. So I quit. I'm
sorry they lost you because
me too.
Because I'm really sorry to hear that, and I hear this from other teachers.
It's crazy,
and I think this is where the science is important. If you try to bring spirituality into the classroom, you cannot do it. But the science that supports the spirituality, the science based upon cooperation and what's called mutual aid, and how that plays out in our everyday lives. That's a deeply spiritual principle. And that little piece, teaching young people and having them go through their adolescent years, their formative years, with this template of cooperation rather than competition. And I'm not saying this is about violent competition. I mean, a friendly game of soccer or chess, it's not that kind of competition. It's the kind of competition that says there's not enough to go around, and it's either me or you, and I'm going to fight so that it's me. That kind of competition is the competition that's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we just feel like we're like a minority of people that get this wisdom, and the majority of people are not. So we feel like kind of we're David and Goliath playing together. And
well, I would say another way to look at it is that you are a pioneering visionary who must come first. The visionaries, the pioneers must come first with the new ideas, so that when the existing system no longer works, there is a new idea already available to go to.
Yeah.
If everyone waited until the moment when you need the new idea to create the idea, it's too late.
Yeah.
But now we have sustainable models of teaching and thinking and living. And as we refine those, I am seeing more of an opening, more of a willingness to embrace new ideas than I ever have before. And I think that's the blessing for our time in history.
Yeah. And when I remember it right, like also when we were in Basel, you were talking about a couple of projects that you're supporting, like school projects.
Actually, it's my next call.
Really? Oh,
really?
So
it's my next call. The 288 schools throughout the world are now asking for modules to teach kindergarten through 9 about resilience, about heart resilience, and using the heart for learning.
Wow.
And a lot of this is coming from, it's also being implemented in refugee camps where they are in constant stress right now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for our conversation
today. To talk to you. Thank you.
It was amazing.
It's an honor for me as well. I look forward to our next.
We as well.